Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and this is the Keto Made Simple podcast.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Eric Westman here, and it's my great pleasure to be with Peter Ballerstedt. Thanks, Peter, for being on.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's a real pleasure to be able to join you.
So we were talking just a moment ago, and you recalled that we first met in 2010 at a medical meeting, probably nutrition and metabolism as part of the American Society of Bariatric Physicians, which name was changed. But anyway, so I've been learning from you for a long time, and you're not typical as the doctor that I interview or nutritionist. You're a PhD doctor, which actually in some circles means even more credible in some circles. But so how did you get into, I know you and people know you as the sod father, as a nice, memorable line. So how did you get into this? And then how did we eventually cross paths? That seems like you remember more about that than I.
Well, clearly me meeting you is far more impactful than you meeting me. So that's only fair, Eric. I started...
It was a big meeting, Peter.
It was. No, I know. I meant that as a compliment. Come on. I, like many of us in this space, I had my own personal health experience. 2007, I was the 51-year-old balding, obese, pre-diabetic. And then I fortunately had a wife in the house that was already reading what was available and trying to apply it in her own life. So she then introduced me to things like Protein Power, Michael and Mary Dan Eads, and that got me started. And then I was working in high tech at the time. I was out of agriculture, and I saw that this conference was going to be up in Seattle, which is a 5-hour drive for me. And all these people that I had been reading blogs or books or whatever were going to be there. And I was like, of course I'm going to go to this. And I had been out of agriculture then since 1995. So this now, and it was the first time I had attended anything like this. It's a professional society. And so when you ask questions, you were asked to introduce yourself and where you were located from and what your specialty was. And so for the first time in about however many years that is, I introduced myself as a forage agronomist and asked questions, and that led to conversations. So
what is a forage agronomist?
You don't know? A forage is...
Well, for the few people watching who don't know.
Sure. Forages are those plants that are grown to be eaten by animals. So, and it doesn't include the mature seed of, say, wheat, but at times we could graze wheat, so it would be considered a forage in an immature stage. It could be pasture, it could be hay, we could cut it and dry it. So hay, pasture, silage. Silage is when we ferment plant material, put it in an oxygen-limiting environment, and it pickles, essentially.
Like the silos I grew up watching in Wisconsin.
Exactly right. That's right. I forgot you were from Wisconsin. Yeah, precisely so. And then I had a minor in ruminant nutrition. And so ruminants are those animals that have a multi-compartmented stomach, 4 compartments, essentially 3 in front of their acidic stomach. And so that's what enables them to utilize all this plant fiber and access the energy that's in cellulose, because no vertebrate animal makes cellulase, the enzyme, to break the glucose units apart and get at that energy. And so these are the animals that are this critical link in the energy flow of the entire biosphere. That we have all this.
Hey, that's a big statement.
Oh, well,
okay. But unpack that for a minute. So if we don't have cellulase, the enzyme ACE is a typical ending for a word that's an enzyme, like lipase, amylase, no cellulase, then a human can't eat cellulose and use it as energy. It kind of goes in and out of these are the fibers we give, the stuff we give people to poop. Oh my goodness. Right.
Right. Right. So these microorganisms that live within the rumen of these large family of animals that long predate primates, evolutionarily speaking, that allows for the utilization of this stored energy that's in cellulose, which is the most abundant carbohydrate in the biosphere.
What is cellulose found in? What kinds of
plants?
Okay.
The cell walls, wood. There's some other compounds that associate with it, but cotton. And so this is a plant cell has a wall, a mammalian cell has a membrane.
You're right. That's made of
yes.
So the plant. So if I eat a plant, there's going to be cellulose in that cell wall that I can't digest.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yes.
I watched a video of a young man who had a ileostomy. He had his colon removed for a condition, and he was very honest about, when I eat celery or plants, it comes out the other end undigested. But when I eat meat, it's all gone. There's no meat coming out here, which explains that because, humans don't. But couldn't we just take a enzyme to cellulase to break down or do we cook it to break how?
I would. Yeah, I would think cooking would be more effective. If I ingest an enzyme, it would have to bypass the stomach, because otherwise it would be denatured in the acidic stomach.
But this is really important. I want to just dwell on what a ruminant animal is, and it doesn't mean they ruminate, but we need to ruminate a bit on it, because a human, as you said, has that acidic stomach, but it's like the fourth in line for a cow. And to say what are we talking about in terms of ruminant animals? So just so I can have that in my head.
Cows, sheep, goats, deer, bison, buffalo, antelopes, giraffes. There's a huge family. Some have horns, and others have antlers. Antlers shed, horns don't. They all have cloven hooves. Okay. They're more of the ruminants make up the majority of our domesticated animals. So and
thank you. Now I know the kind of animals we're talking about. Back to the stomachs. So in modern medical terminology, we call this the microbiome. The microbes or bacteria that are in the gut, and so there's enough bacteria to change the cellulose into what? How is your ruminant agriculture biochemistry and physiology?
Well, so there are two principal products besides the microbes themselves, right? That's one, and I'll talk about that.
And that was, I couldn't imagine. So a lot of the protein that a cow gets is from the microbiome, the bacteria that die and then they get absorbed. That just blew me away when I heard that the first time in the context of a video. The Homo carnivorous. Did you see this? Barry Groves kind of took apart the diets and concluded that all mammals absorb a 70% diet, even though it's not 70% fat in what they eat. It's because of this microbiome.
Exactly.
That blew me away. So the bacteria themselves get absorbed, but the cellulose gets transformed into
volatile fatty acids. So
no,
yes.
Come on, wait.
Yes,
We're told not to eat fat, and yet
yes. So
this is the cow's stomach. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Well, it's not just cows. Remember, it's all ruminants. If you put fat is toxic in the rumen environment, it interferes with fiber digestion. And so you can only put in about 5, maybe 6%. Ether extract is one estimate of lipid content, fat content in feeds. And so somewhere in that 5-6%, interestingly enough, the more polyunsaturated fat, the lower the total can be. Because polyunsaturated fats are apparently more toxic than others. And there's this process called biohydrogenation in the rumen, in which those double bonds then get saturated. But in any case, so 4, 5, 6%, call it 5% in, and like you say, 70+% of the energy the host ruminant gets, specifically a cow, I heard in the example, is going to come from these volatile fatty acids. So one of the slides that I use is to show 2 groups of mammals. In group A is the ruminant, and we got sheep and cattle and a mountain gorilla. Gorilla's not a ruminant. Then the group B, and this is directly from Homo carnivorous, the group B is the polar bear, the lion, and Homo sapien. And the question then is, which group is designed to digest a low-fat diet?
Okay.
And it's a trick question because none of them are designed to digest. There's a difference between ingest and digest. And so the group B, those organisms don't have the machinery that the group A mammals do, and they can spin fiber into gold, turn fiber into fat. They do it differently because the mountain gorilla is a hindgut fermenter, and the ruminants are pre-gastric fermentation.
But that's a really important point. And I've seen this mistake made by those out there who think all you should eat is plants, that they say, be a gorilla, that we should be like gorillas. Our internal intestines are not the same, right? So you explain that. So there's a difference between a ruminant and the ape or gorilla in terms of insides, but there's similarities too, right?
Well, the hindgut ferment, so there's large intestines in both, and there's cecums in both. They're in the gorilla, they're much larger on a normalized body weight, situation than humans. Far bigger. And that's where this post-gastric fermentation takes place. There's also a little practice called coprophagy, that they will eat their own droppings. And so if you're going to eat like a gorilla, you might want to know about that. I'll take a hard pass. There's also some...
Have you... there's some cultures that's kind of... Have you ever had stinky tofu? Anyway, suffice it to say, coprophagy, eating the poop, your own poop, why would that be important for the gorilla then?
Because it allows them to utilize the products of the microbial fermentation that took place in their cecum, large intestine.
And that's why the gorilla has a big belly, right? Where if you look at them from the side, that's to house this bacteria fermentation, but they're hindgut fermenters, rather, meaning the food comes through the acidic environment first.
Mm-hmm.
That would be more like the human, where first you have the stomach, and then you have the small and the large intestine. But our cecum is really kind of small, and the appendix is very small. Some have argued that that's sort of the vestigial area of the millions of years of evolution. But so I guess so why would it be important to have a ruminant, a cow, or a ruminant animal in the whole? Unpack that statement you made in the whole chain of life, if you will.
So I have a definition of agriculture, which basically is the history of humanity modifying its environments to produce more biomass than they would without those manipulations. Okay, so wherever humanity is gone, there are various practices that we can see from records and archaeological evidence or written records where they do things to suppress some vegetation and favor others, and there's all kinds of things we could talk about. But the vast majority of that biomass isn't human edible. Like if I grow a crop of corn or a crop of wheat, more than half of that above the ground biomass isn't edible by humans. And so if we look at all of the domesticated ruminants worldwide, 96% of their feed consumed is not human edible.
Wow.
So that's why they're key, because they upcycle. You mentioned before the microbial protein. So because of the microorganisms, any nitrogenous material, the nitrogen-containing material that comes in to the rumen, if it can be degraded in the rumen, that nitrogen is available for the microorganisms to capture and use to make protein. And so then you have that body of microorganisms flowing down into the acidic stomach where they're digested, harvested, if you will, by the ruminant animal. So if you think about essential macronutrients, there are essential amino acids in the human diet. There's no such thing as an essential amino acid in a ruminant's diet until we really push their production.
There's essential meaning you have to eat it. You can't make it yourself.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It must be in the diet. We lack the ability either completely to synthesize it or synthesize enough of it. And then there are such things as essential fatty acids in the human diet. There's no such thing as an essential fatty acid in a ruminant's diet. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate in the human diet, as you taught me in 2010. There are two forms that are essential in a ruminant's diet. You have to have both the cell wall and the cell contents carbohydrates, two different kinds, in proper balance in order for the rumen to function properly. So it's this really nice ecological fit within this energy flow that starts with sunlight, captured via photosynthesis to produce carbohydrate and other compounds, organic compounds, that then flows through the heterotrophs, the organisms that can't make organic compounds out of inorganic materials. Starts with the herbivores, the plant eaters. The ruminants are the most specialized forms of herbivores, and then goes through omnivores like ourselves with varying amounts of animal source food in our diet, but we're then able to access that energy that was originally captured by photosynthesis.
Yeah, so that leads to the argument that it's helpful to have meat eating. I mean, it's helpful to be eating meat and beef or it's part of just the proper use of what we have, or the efficient use, I guess. Well, now I'm still intrigued about the microbiome in the animal. So if you put if a ruminant is so dependent on these microbes, what if they get antibiotics? What if the antibiotics kill the wrong microbes, or is it so robust that it doesn't cause a problem?
Well, it would be a function of how those antibiotics, which ones, how they're administered, and how severe the illness is that they're trying to treat. And so there's a significant amount of the antibiotics, antimicrobials that are used in beef production in the U.S. are called ionophores, and they have no use in human medicine. And one of the things that they do is they do impact the microbial population in the rumen. And part of that is they shift the population so less of the energy goes in one way that leads to it improves feed use efficiency by impacting that microbial population. There's a whole lot of things now they're looking for feed additives that would suppress methane generation, which is a natural process within the rumen of all ruminant animals. And, if I give an antibiotic intramuscularly, then that's probably not going to have a significant impact within the rumen, which in a mature cow could be like, 40, 50 gallons of volume. It's they're a fermentation on legs, fermentation vat.
Yeah, well, in the human using antibiotics, I never consider that it might interfere with energy absorption or alter it. But I guess a lot is being learned, and you definitely change the microbiome in the human by what you eat, and the more carbs, the more plants, the more microbes you have, perhaps to digest, try to digest all that stuff. Wow. So, how did you personally get interested in forage agronomy?
I grew up in suburban Philadelphia, Lower Bucks County, Pennsylvania, but I discovered pretty soon I'd rather live in the country, which I didn't really understand. I just knew I liked those landscapes better. And then through just, life, right? There are choices, there are situations, and you end up following them. Ended up at a school, a 2-year school in upstate New York. I needed an elective. I couldn't get into the program I wanted to get into. So they said, take some requirements and take some electives and then come back next term. And so the elective I took was field crop production. And that got me out on a dairy farm where we went through the soils maps and the cropping history and how many animals. So, planning the rotations and what crops we're going to plant where and the fertility and all of those things. And I was just fascinated. Had no idea about any of this. The soil is amazing, et cetera, et cetera. So then I continued, went to University of Georgia because the man that taught that class was an alum. And so he directed me down there. I finished my bachelor's. I got a master's. I was accepted at University of Kentucky to do some work. But I took a class while at Georgia from a man who was a pasture ecologist. And that changed what I was going to do. I was far more interested in following that than what I'd already been accepted to do. And I was able to swap over to another professor. And so, it's one of these things where you look at those pivotal people in your life that had a big impact. So that's, and since I was interested in forages, it makes sense to know about the ruminant, nutrition and the animals you're going to be feeding.
one of the dramatic telling of this kind of story is in a movie called The Biggest Little Farm that I saw a few years ago, where they transformed this hard, dead soil into lush, verdant vegetables and trees, and it was through, manure, the animal. And then regenerative agriculture being sort of the model of having a farm and thoughtfully using and managing. Now let's just get to some of the myths.
Yes.
I mean, and it's important to know a little of your background, who you are. You're not, and I've known you for a long time. You're not, best I can tell, someone who's out for major league profits and going on junkets and things like that. So why is it that it's being planted in the brains of people and our youth, especially? I'll get to a patient discussion I had in just a moment, where they think if I want to save the planet, which is I want to too, then I shouldn't eat meat,
Right?
And it's not even chickens and I define, how do you define meat? I'll say, and they'll say, well, red meat. It's cows, and so why is this being, if cows are so amazing, turning undigestible food for humans into something a human can use, very high quality protein too? How is this myth or different narrative being spread, and is it true?
So no, it's not true. And there's a couple points that have kind of come by, and I want to just hit them quickly. One is, it's my belief, based on my studies and the evidence and the people I respect, that some amount of animal source food is essential for proper human development and function and health and flourishing. Now, we could argue about how much that is, but there's clear evidence of human beings being harmed by too little. Okay, we can look around the world and see that evidence, and good work is being done to try to address that.
And that's the quality of the protein from animal sources is different than the quality from plant sources, right?
Sure, but it's also the availability of vitamin A and zinc and iron and other non sort of carnitine and choline and vitamin B12, and these are nutrients which are best sourced or solely sourced from animal source foods. Now, again, meat is an animal.
If you do a vegan diet, they say, oh, you just supplement with vitamin B12 because there's no B12 in that diet. So yeah, well, and then it's said that basically when you eat animal source food, you're eating the nutrition, vitamins and minerals that it takes to properly utilize that energy. Whereas, let's say you have a protein shake, you're not getting all of the other nutrients that come with it. So, but I interrupt, but I'm sorry.
No, I fully think that 80% of the people need to address by a whole food diet that aligns with meeting metabolic targets, right? So the highly processed extracts or whatever, I recognize that they have application under certain conditions, but for again, I'm concerned about feeding populations. And so what's the 80% of the issue, and then we can worry about the 20% later on. The casting aspersions or trying to understand what the motivations of people are is probably something I should try to avoid, because I'm sure I can't read other people's minds. We could turn it over and say, why do people believe that fat in the diet causes heart disease? Well, there's been half a century of public messaging about that. And it started in a couple places that you're well familiar with, and people within the Adapt Your Life Academy have heard from people who documented that. And so that's part of it. We know that there's a certain philosophical movement that supports that kind of message. But, you're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts, right? So these are just, and I know that some of these personal choices then become who we are. And so to confront those is then something that we need to be very respectful and, conscious of, because probably I'm not going to convince anyone in one conversation. Hopefully what I don't do is create roadblocks to adoption later, right? And so I want to just throw some seeds on the ground, you should pardon the expression, and maybe they'll sprout this time, or maybe they'll be dormant and come to life later. But the fact remains that there is no sustainable food system without livestock agriculture in general, and without ruminants in particular. There's no either or here. You can't have plant agriculture without animal agriculture. And there's details we could get into that. We've talked about, the WHO says that the best source of the essential nutrients children 6 months to 36 months of age need are supplied by meat, eggs, dairy, seafood. Hello, Tim Noakes. Hello. Yeah. But UNICEF says 60% of children 6 months to 36 months of age do not get to eat meat, eggs, dairy, seafood. So there's a certain aspect to this where, like, people in the high-income Western world can entertain notions because they have choices that aren't available to the vast majority of humanity. And as we look, I just gave another college lecture where I had to update the slide because it's only 26 years to 2050. Right? I've been doing it long enough that I have to keep changing that number. And we're going to have 2 billion more people, but it's going to be an older population. An older population needs a higher quality diet than a middle-aged population. It's not going to be more children. Same number of children 15 and under in 2100 as there are today. So the population growth is coming from people getting to live into their 70s and 80s, and that's primarily in Africa and Asia. It's 70% of humanity is going to live in urban areas. So we're producing food somewhere, we're shipping it in. We've got all of these and most of humanity is going to live in the tropical areas of the world, which is like only about a third of the landmass. So all of these are issues, and I'm trying to tell people who are where I was so many years ago, this is something you can work in and make a dramatic impact. And that gets us back to this idea of course, people, it's reasonable to be concerned about the environment, just like it's reasonable to be concerned about your own health. And it's completely reasonable to be concerned about animal welfare, which is different from animal rights. And it's completely reasonable to be concerned about your fellow man. You take those reasonable concerns, you couple them with bad information, you end up making bad decisions. So just recently, last December, the Food and Agriculture Organization put out a pathways report on options currently available and sort of in the research pipeline to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from global livestock agriculture. And they listed a whole number of things. The least impactful was personal dietary choices. Far more impactful would be things like feed quality, so better nutrition, improved genetics in the animals so that they're more productive, reproductive efficiency in the animals, herd health. Something like 20% of the meat that's produced every year is lost because of animal disease. So you have that environmental impact of producing these animals, and then there's no harvestable yield because you've lost the animal. And you can think about the impact that would have on the people that own the animal and are trying to make a living, and now it's gone. That's a loss. There's many factors here. There was Hall and White, I believe. I can't remember the year. They produced an estimate. They asked the question, what would be the impact on greenhouse gas emissions if the U.S. eliminated livestock agriculture? And by their estimate, you would see something under 2.5% reduction in total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. It would be like 0.4% globally. Okay, but there are no solutions. There's only trade-offs, right? And,
well, so I remember we were at a conference and you presented the reality that the modern medical care produces greenhouse gas emissions, and the whole idea of cow farts and what's really burps and all these greenhouse gas emissions, and it's been popularized and satirized, but if I can see why, if I'm one individual, and yes, it's a minor player in terms of the big thing, but if I can do everything I can by my food choice to save the planet, and I'm getting bombarded by the messaging, how do I handle that patient who came into me doing a vegan diet naively, and he wasn't really feeling well, and wondered if it might be the diet, and I just asked, where veganism came from, and he said no, and I we looked up in the font of all knowledge, Wikipedia, and apparently the term was developed in the 1940s, and so it's something really new. And we don't understand the long-term health implications that, like, we understand for the meat or animal source food health, which is actually looks really good. So again, how the greenhouse gas emissions. How would I eat for my environment then if I wanted every dollar that I spent to go to saving the planet?
Okay, so let me just throw this out. I have a paper that estimated it made the point that the U.S. healthcare industry is a significant source of pollution, right? And we can think about, the medical waste from kidney dialysis, or you could name them better. And that included an estimate 10% of the total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. 10. All of agriculture in the U.S. is somewhere around 10. The animal agriculture is 4, beef is 2. So, and it's completely fair to point out those are not apples to apples comparisons. They did their estimates differently. The point is that it has an impact and we're not talking about it. Another estimate looked at the emissions intensity of the global pharmaceutical industry. And they came up with a statement that said that the pharmaceutical industry is a higher intensity emitter than the automotive industry. There's a greater variation across industries, which makes sense depending on where it's located in the world. And someone...
Go ahead, sorry.
Someone else took the values from that estimate, and they looked at it and they said, if the average adult American with type 2 diabetes could eliminate their medication use, they would lower their carbon footprint 29% more than if they shifted from a high meat to a vegan diet. So let's just imagine that such a thing like drug-free remission were even possible. I mean, let's really get crazy. And
now you're being sarcastic. That is possible.
Yes, of course.
Food, and not all the people watching this will realize that diabetes is reversible, and we actually are teaching that at my teaching company. So, but again, now let's go to the converse. So I'm someone who eats to save the planet. If I do eat plant-based sourced and get the Impossible Burger and things like that, am I really doing less harm than I am if I'm eating meat?
No, you're not doing less harm. And you may, who knows, be doing more harm to yourself, because we now understand that the food value of those plant pucks is much lower than the marketing pitch.
Is that the Impossible Burger plant pucks?
Well, and beyond. They're both,
Beyond Burger. Oh, got it.
So we were told those products were sold on their nutritional equivalency or superiority, right? Because that nasty animal source food has saturated fat, and we know that's not good, right? No, we don't know that's not good. Exactly. Sorry. But that's been part of the messaging all along. And there's all these stories that have come along, and you start pulling them apart and you realize that thing looked like a really stout rope, and now you're down to one strand left intact. And you begin to look at that a little, So the environmental impact has been dramatically undersold. And there's been some estimates looking at that. We know, so there's a method of estimating the protein quality that is been more recently advocated, called DIAS, Digestible Indispensable Amino Acid Score. And it looks at the individual, as it says, amino acid digestibility. Rather than look at protein digestibility, it looks at specific amino acids. So it can then say, how well does this meal or diet meet those estimates of requirement? And they ran those with the plant pucks. And what they found was, because Impossible, which has S's, therefore I say soy, that's how I keep them straight. Impossible Burger is made with soy. Because it's soy, it does qualify for a good protein source label claim. The Beyond protein, at the time anyway, they keep changing the formulation. The Beyond was made with pea protein extract, and that does not qualify as a good source of protein label claim. Okay, but nobody eats those things by themselves. You're going to slide it between two pieces of wheat bread. There's not enough lysine in the Impossible Burger to make up for the low level of lysine in the wheat bread. And so as a meal, it cannot be called a good source of protein. So a lot of this messaging has been developed with what we can call an unjustifiably oversimplified dietary message, where they treat calories from plants as if they're equivalent to calories from animal source food. They treat other nutrients, interchangeably between the two. They're still believing a lot of the mindset narrative about what constitutes a heart-healthy, meal. And so all of that now becomes conflated. So back to your patient, and I've thought about this, and I know I don't have a good answer, but, the simple thing is, when you improve your health, you are improving the world. And when you make these other choices, you're doing it based on somebody saying it will do something. So, the patient is not feeling well in any number of things. Okay, so you want to feel better. What are those goals? How can we measure if you're making progress? Okay, so make this change and see what response is. And if you have a family, what impact does your feeling better have on your family? What impact does having to pay less for drugs or supplements have on your budget? What, et cetera, et cetera. 90% of our healthcare spend in the United States is chronic illness. What percent of that chronic illness is metabolic, therefore nutritional in nature? That spend is somewhere north of $4 trillion.
Finally dawned on me that our focus, let's go to human metabolism. You focus on a cholesterol level. Well, that's not what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent atherosclerosis, the heart attack, the stroke. So, but the whole medical world is focused on the cholesterol. In the greenhouse gas emissions and this story and all, we're really measuring surrogate things, not the outcome. Like, so how are you going to know that our change in the animal, whatever, to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, that's affecting the overall climate specifically, right?
Sure. I've looked a little bit on this. Animal agriculture is not the driver of emissions. It's there, right? So it's a number. It could be addressed. It should be addressed. It's fair to point out that the EPA, in its sources and sinks budget for anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S., agriculture shows up in land use. That's the bucket that they have energy, and then they have transportation, et cetera. Okay. So all of that is somewhere 10 to 11% of total. That includes forestry, some other things. But already in the last report, it was sequestering 12%. So already land use is carbon negative, balanced to carbon negative in the United States. It's the only, sector that is. Okay, and we need to work globally to improve those systems to reduce their impacts, absolutely. But then you look at the energy globally, and you come to realize that if you were to replace the 5% of the worst emitting 5% of global coal power plants in the world, that would be an offset. Like if you could replace them with the zero carbon energy, okay, that amount of emissions is like 150% of the total present livestock emissions from 5%. So what's happening now in the world is you have parts of the world that are trying to modernize. To modernize, they need electricity. What are they going to use to do that? Coal is the fuel of choice there now. In the future, or maybe we could help them get there, but so whatever we entertain in our part of the world isn't going to be reflected in global reality because of these other trends that are taking place. So get it back to the personal and understand that anytime we talk about sustainability, we have to consider three broad categories. In economic sustainability, societal factors of sustainability, as well as environmental factors of sustainability. And one of those environmental factors is greenhouse gas emissions, right? But too often this whole conversation gets reduced down to just the greenhouse gas emissions. And so if, with 30, it's estimated that in 6 years, global spending for chronic disease care is going to be $37 trillion if things follow. So what else could be done with some of that money or the limited healthcare resources if 90% of them in the U.S. wasn't going toward addressing what might well be addressed through an effective lifestyle intervention that I've trained myself to call therapeutic carbohydrate reduction. And it's diabetes is enough, but as you've helped me learn, it's not merely diabetes. It's all of these diseases that all have cost and impact on people, the quality of their lives. And it's one of those things that for me is so obvious. I keep looking around and say, what am I missing? Because other people aren't catching that message yet. So making more people aware of the fact that, drug-free remission of type 2 diabetes is a real thing. It's in the literature.
Well, Okay, so this is the hardest question that for me to answer and to respond to, and that is you made reference to it, and that's the treatment of the animals. How do I respond? I personally know that other animals have to die for me to live if I'm eating animal source foods. What would be your response to the visual display of all of animals being cruelly raised? And having thought, I'm sure you thought this through.
Yeah. Well, so it's really unfair to judge any group of people by a few outliers who, for a number of tragic reasons, behave in the way that they do, right? We would not support people doing that. The vast majority of people involved in animal agriculture understand their role as someone who has charge of these animals, and they go to great lengths to ensure their welfare, and to the point where ranchers in the Western U.S. and other parts of the country frequently put their lives at risk to ensure that the animals are cared for, right? Think of going out in the middle of a blizzard to make sure that the animals are in shelter, have access to water, have access to feed. The best example is a friend who's a family medicine practitioner out of Dillon, Montana. Shout out to John. He gave me the story of having the local emergency department call him up and say, "Would you please come talk sense to your patient?" And so he comes in, and this is, 60-year-old, whatever, rancher, and he's had signs of having had a heart attack, and they want to admit him to the hospital. And he's saying, "No, I can't. I can't." And so John's job was to try to talk him into that. And the rancher was saying, "Doc, I'll sign whatever it takes as a waiver, whatever. I'll be here tomorrow. We'll take care of it. But I have to take care of the cows tonight. Haven't made those arrangements. I'll make arrangements for that, whatever. Cows come first," is this idea that is a reality within. So, and then we could think, we understand that chronic stress in a human being doesn't help us, may lead to greater susceptibility to disease. We don't perform as same thing with animals. They understand this. And at the end of the day, without profit, there's no sustainability. And that is a concern within the livestock industry, is profit. And so there's lots of work going on with stress-free handling of livestock and how to accomplish those absolutely necessary practices with a minimum of stress on the animals. But at the end of the day, like you said, big fish eat little fish. We are heterotrophs at the end of the day, so we have to consume other organisms. Yeah. And we've talked about why some of those need to be animals.
So another person that I asked that question said, "Tell your patient or whomever to go out to the farm, go take a look. Mm-hmm. Don't use the stylized or the worst case scenario. Go out and see how the animals are treated for yourself." Mm-hmm. Although I was going to do that. You went from the town to the
absolutely. Well, but reach out, get those answers.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to help me through the years, not really knowing the maelstrom of not only health but the agriculture and all. I mean, the flap comes from lots of different areas, and still eating animal source foods makes me less worried nutritionally because of all the things that we know and what you said. So, and I'm optimistic that there will be a balance of all of these different things, or maybe a technological answer that we haven't come up with for global warming or the greenhouse gas emissions, but to put it in context is really important. And then also to just tell people that because you're eating a certain way doesn't mean you're actually saving the environment when everyone says you are. Wow. Again, you're not my typical interviewer or interviewee, but thank you. And any last thoughts for let's now just toggle into therapeutic carbohydrate reduction and the things that can happen in your world. What sort of barriers do people see and talk about? And what would you say to folks not sure about it, or on the fence, or worried about all of these, worried about animals?
Well, first of all, thank you for what you've been doing and how you've been helping the community of researchers and clinicians expand this. I think that we won't be able to meet the needs of the world of 2050 if we don't improve the productivity and efficiency of our global livestock systems. And that what we're facing globally is an epidemic of malnutrition. And it manifests itself differently, but it cuts across all income level countries. And so it's important for us to get that message out that this pandemic of chronic illness is actually malnutrition. And the part of the challenge, I think, within some of the agricultural communities is for decades they've been hammered by, various voices saying things that aren't well-founded. And so they've come to rely on support from organizations like USDA, et cetera. And so now to come to them and say, well, that dietary guideline might not be as well sourced. Well, now they're sort of, okay, what do I do with this? But at the other side, I think that these are populations that have sort of known that was probably not the best, so it's very much a mixed thing. At this point, though, I keep wanting to get more and more people aware of that most important message. And then as we can learn that we no longer need to fear the fat that naturally occurs in our products, that will help differentiate. I keep advocating that they need to stop talking about themselves as protein industry, because that just puts you on par with the plant puck industry or the plant juice beverage or whatever. And embrace everything that comes as the nutritional package that's meat and why that's vital. And actually the world needs more of it. And I think that it's very much a two-way bridge. And I've, the times that you've come and addressed the National Grazing Lands Coalition, the American Forage and Grassland Council, those things are things that more and more I want to just see what I can do now that I'm retired, to build these bridges between all these different disciplines. Somebody gave me the quote that we need to stop building silos and start building lighthouses. And I'm in the enviable position of I don't have to do the research. I can just make sure people know that there are people like you doing the research. And then there are people like, Eric Berg out of North Dakota State University doing the research, or any number of others. And I shouldn't have even started naming people because you're not going to name them all. I think we just have really, really good news. And I think we need good news these days. And finding a way to get past the us versus them, the diet wars kind of thing. I really don't want to do any of that. I just want people to know that if they're facing any of these health challenges, there's good news. You could try this. And if you find that you need to eat more or some animal source food as part of this, I hear people say it's not a requirement. I don't know. I'm not that kind of doctor. But if you end up wrestling with this idea, then I'm glad to introduce you to people that can help set your mind at ease about environmental impact or any of those other issues, because the most important thing is for people to do what they need to do to improve their own health.
As always, well said. Now, how do people find you? What's your internet presence, or how would someone find you?
You can find me on, I keep calling it Twitter, X, and Instagram as grass-based, one word. You can find me at a Facebook, that's the name, Facebook page, Grass-Based Health. I'm in LinkedIn and YouTube by my name. And I'm not hard to find. If you Google my name, you'll probably, if you find another Ballerstedt that ain't me, he's probably kin, let me know. We haven't met. It's not, so, yeah, just not hard to find.
Thanks again, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So I think that's going to be it.
Okay.
You're over there. I've been looking into a camera.
Okay.
So, keep up the good work.
Thank you. And you, it's really exciting. I didn't even mention the mental health issue.
Yeah.
That's just so encouraging.
That's so cool.
That's part of my family background.
Mine too.
Everyone. Yeah, probably so. I mean, that's one of the one of the things I say to the ag audiences or communities is, look, we've got to get beyond talking amongst ourselves, right? There's 2% of people in agriculture. There's 98%. You need to find some way to cross over and tell the good news, because it's what I know about what's called regenerative agriculture is like people today discovering therapeutic carbohydrate reduction and don't know what Westman was doing 25 years ago, right? So glad you found us. Let me introduce you to some, great. Welcome aboard. But when so many people are facing this issue, it's the perfect entry point, because it's sort of that, and it's not as if the people in agriculture don't need to worry about this, because I look at the audiences there and go, at the Grazing Lands Coalition, right? The one person I remember, she goes, well, we all know this. How do we get them to know it? And I was walking around looking at the attendees going, I'm not sure that you all know this. Yeah, I know. I feel bad for judging. Yes. But there you are. Oh, and I also remember the conversation with a lady whose doctor was after her because of her cholesterol and wanted her to take drugs and wanted to know if there's some food or supplements that you'd recommend. And you kind of did I don't want you to worry about your cholesterol.
Have you followed the Dave Feldman study? Did you see the presentation that Budhoff gave?
Yes, I was there.
Oh, you were there? Okay. And then were you at the Citizen Science Las Vegas meeting?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because the conversation or panel discussion of Nadir, Brett, and Cromwell was fascinating. I mean, I think that should be, like, years from now, one of the pivotal discussions. And yet, David Diamond is trying to do a guest series of articles about this. So he asked me to be a guest editor with him. Yeah. And Ron Krauss, who is really kind of the academic hold, is kind of like bailing out. Still, he doesn't want to be part of going against, well, as Nadir said, in that a $19 billion barrier between, Well,
but Krauss is retired, isn't he? What?
I don't know, but that doesn't matter.
What's it?
I mean, I met the guy who got hammered because of eggs with the first nutritional guideline, and my mom tracked him down because he lived in that little community. I said, do you know Al Harper? And she goes, yeah, he's a biochemist, lives on this. Oh my God. So I met with Al. He was retired, and he was up in Seattle. And in fact, that meeting in 2010, I went to lunch, and I said, here's just a little essay about carbs not being essential. I wonder, he helped me, and he wrote at the end, under the conditions studied, you have to add that on everything you do. And I looked at him and I said, would you be a co-author with me on this letter? And he said, no, I can't. It was so raked through, like his family was put up, he wasn't ready for that sort of trashing in the media.
Right.
We saw Dr. Atkins go through that.
Yes.
Just bring them out, and, sunlight will be the best disinfectant. It's like, no, if you're not trained with that, you'll say all sorts of things. But Al wouldn't. Yeah, I'm not surprised. So I wrote offline a little note to Ron saying, it's been 20 years since we met, and what's changed?
Really, what's changed? And
it finally occurred to me there's no credible study, prospective or otherwise, that says a low-carb diet, when done right, is harmful. There's never been a study, and yet we were assumed a defensive position.
Right.
Because of what everyone thought, and I thought it too. I mean, so...
well, and, how many people... So these conversations... well-meaning people doing good work, and we're looking at food systems, and they're saying, but where's the fiber going to come from?
No.
Yeah. I mean, it's like...
Well, thanks for having me unpack that. I think, that's going to be probably be one of the short clips that my colleague uses. I got to run. And
Eric,
so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. If I've said it before, if I can do anything, please don't hesitate to ask.
And be well.
All right, we'll see you San Diego. Are you going?
So. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Oh.
Take care.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.